UFC returns to Vancouver for the first time in almost 4 years. Saturday, June 10th, Rogers Arena, Nunes versus Aldana. Harrison Price from Wall Center, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome our next guest in studio here at the Go-Goat Sports Studio because he's local, independent media. He is your go-to source for fighter interviews in the MMA. And Blake, he's also a long-standing Harrison Price listener and a Carlson guy. Yeah. Be still my heart. James Lynch, welcome to the show. It has been we should have had you on years ago, my friend. Good to see you.
Never too late, and I'm feeling a lot better after that intro, Matt. Thank you so much, man. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's just, before we get into UFC 289, Nunes Aldana from Rogers Arena tomorrow, and the first UFC pay-per-view card here in 9 years, tell them a little bit about your story, because, boy, in this new media environment world, you got to hustle. It's the gig economy. You got to separate yourself from others. And James, you have done all of those things.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I could sort of see the tide changing, as I'm sure you guys can relate to, with big media in Canada, especially with sports media and cuts. And I'll never forget this. When I worked at TSN years ago, I remember hearing about them doing cuts because something at Much Music wasn't doing very well. And I thought that was very odd, back then, that some other network is suffering. So we had to make cuts in the sports department. And I kind of knew back then that maybe I should start thinking about building up a brand for myself. So, not to make it too long here, I have worked in sports media, in television specifically, for a long time. Went on the digital side on TSN for a year and a bit, worked for Discovery Channel. And then on the side, I was always interested in mixed martial arts. And I was telling you guys off air that I got into the sport after I graduated high school, went to university at Carleton. Matt, you know that place a little bit. And I just became a fan, and I could sort of see there was a niche here. And this was at the height of Canadian MMA at the time, where George St. Pierre was the guy. When Canada was a priority for the UFC, they would come all the time. There was no questions asked. And so it was really a great time to be a fan. And so I was sort of in the forefront of that, getting to see George St. Pierre have his first fight in Canada, getting to see him, achieve all this success and become a global superstar. So I think it was right place, right time. But I always
What year are we talking here?
We're talking like 2004, 2005, first getting in the industry at Fight Network, 2008. So fast forward a little bit. Always knew I wanted to be in sports, wanted to do what you guys did, be in hockey. Honestly, that was always the dream, but I could see this was a niche sport. So started doing this on the side, interviewing fighters. I always just found it interesting to, hear the stories of these fighters, because it is the toughest sport in the world. To do what they do, to get the pay that they get paid, it is absolutely brutal, and very rewarding as well too, when you see some of the sacrifices that they put in. So I was doing the fighter interviews, and then I became a dad in 2017. Couldn't do both. Couldn't be corporate James and be sports James. So I left the corporate world and went on my own in 2017. Big shout out to my wife, Trisha, who supported me all the way and let me achieve this dream. And it was just all about hustling. And a lot of people in this industry that are doing this full time, they work for one company, one outlet. I did it a little bit differently. I work for a bunch of different companies, and that's how I'm able to make my living.
The fighters in the octagon have risks, but us in the independent media, we've got risks too. And you're taking those, and now you're traveling shoulder to shoulder with the guys like Ariel Helwani in the crowd for weigh-ins. I mean, that's kind of fun, huh?
It is. That's the most rewarding part, is getting to go to these events, being on the front line. I do a lot of interviews at home, and a lot of people say, do you ever go to the events? And it's like, I would love to. I got 2 kids, though. You got to play the role of dad and also play the role of journalist. So I find that I right now, especially, it's more about picking the right events. I mean, I was so happy when they came here. A lot of people are upset with this card, but I'm like, I get to drive into this card. I went to the media day on Wednesday, and I still got to go pick up my sons from school. So there's a lot of benefits when they come back to Canada. But Vegas, with it being so close for us, it's only, 2-hour flight. I'm still able to go to events. I usually just sort of pick the bigger events and go to those. I was at John Jones' fight against Cyril Gahn, his big return fight. I'll be at the title fight next month with Alex Volkanovski and Yair Rodriguez, but it's sort of a pick and choose, because I really can do a lot of my work from home. That's the beauty. I do it all on Skype. I took my old laundry room in my house and turned it into a studio, and people don't even know it. They're like, this looks like a huge studio. I'm like, it's not. I had to take out a washer and dryer, and my chairs in there now. It looks great.
So why the drought here in Vancouver? Because I remember, Canada was a hotbed. Vancouver within that scope was considered, when we're talking about pay-per-view downloads, they could monitor where it's all coming from. Vancouver was a hotbed. Why have they been so reticent to come here, do you think?
There's no BC stars, so to speak. There's actually only one fighter, if I'm not mistaken, on the roster from British Columbia. That's Jamie Lynn Horth, who's from Squamish. But outside of that, there isn't a lot of local fighters. We had Rory McDonald for a few years,
for a long
right?
time, yeah.
And that was a big deal. And I think there was more of a priority to come back. I'd say Canada in general has been a little bit on the back burner. You're seeing Brazil and Australia getting more push because it really has to do with the fighters that are there. And I think that, I'm very happy that they've come back here. But even then, this card, maybe not the strongest because Vegas and New York have been their priorities when it comes to the bigger cards. And even Abu Dhabi now has entered the fray with the fact that the government seems to cover a lot of the costs there for them. It's more of like a, good tourist thing. So to answer your question, I think until we get another sort of big Canadian name here, I think that's why it's not a priority for the UFC.
We had Rory McDonald on the show a couple of times over the years. We had proper Mike Malott earlier this week. I've never had a bad UFC interview, James. They're very well coached up on media, but they also have fantastic stories, and they're not afraid to share.
Yeah.
So what you do on a day-to-day basis interviewing these guys, it must be so rewarding because I imagine you turn the mic off and go, boy,
that worked.
That was a good conversation.
Yeah, and I think part of it is the fact that these guys aren't trained the same way that say NHL players are when it comes to saying the wrong thing and getting it out there. It's sort of because it's an individual sport. There's more of that one-on-one as opposed to going through like a team PR for an interview. And it's funny, we were talking about BC media before this. I saw Jay Janhauer at the media day the other day, and we were talking about this, and he was talking about how much he enjoyed being at the media day because you don't get a lot of this from some of the athletes in the other sports. And I was explaining to him that I think for a lot of these guys, they don't get a ton of exposure from mainstream outlets. So for them, it's more about being open, and it's not as policed, so to speak, when it comes to that stuff.
And James, that is honestly, if I can sing your praises here, I think that's the brilliant decision that you made way back when, because Blake and I used to always get messages from listeners back in the old radio days, like, how come you don't do more UFC or MMA interviews? And we'd have Spencer Kite on and Mauro Ranallo and fighters when they came through town, but how come you didn't do more of it? And one of the things we used to always say was, it is a young enough sport that it grew up in the digital space, and that fans went to digital and independent outlets as their go-to more so than the mainstream. So you being on
experts,
as
much as we pay attention, we're not experts.
Right. So you making that call and understanding basically which platforms would be most effective and where those platforms are all those years ago was like I say, a brilliant decision career-wise.
Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the things I haven't mentioned here that I think is really key in how I've been able to get to where I'm at is back when I started, my philosophy was I'm going to interview everyone. So we're talking, regional fighters, things of that nature, because I wanted the practice. That's one thing people ask me. I'm not comfortable on camera. Start recording. You don't even have to post it. Just start recording, put in those reps. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And kind of what I'm tying back to with the regional thing here is a lot of the fighters that I interviewed on the regional scene are now big names in the UFC. Sean O'Malley, I remember interviewing him, for example, who's a huge star in the UFC now. He was a regional fighter training in Arizona, and now he's one of the biggest stars in the UFC. Jamal Hill, who's a light heavyweight champion now. I interviewed him in 2017 when nobody knew who he was, when he was working a full-time job on the regional road. And here's the thing, a lot of these fighters remember that. They remember that I put the effort back in there. And even now, I still interview amateur fighters, regional fighters, because I think it's important as you grow with the sport, you got to identify those fighters that are making their way up. And I think that's a reason as well that I've been able to have these relationships I have. There's a number of journalists in this space that the UFC emails them and says, hey, do you want to interview these fighters? I don't have that luxury. I have to go through management. I have to go through fighters directly.
Last general question before we can get to the card is this sport had such a steep learning curve in terms of the fandom and popularity. It has, I won't say it's plateaued, but it's certainly flattened out from where it is. Is there another steep incline coming with a WWE affiliation here, or is there? Do you think that they're going to have to fight tooth and nail to continue the upward trend?
It's still going to be tooth and nail for a couple of reasons. One, I think that combat sports across the board, including boxing, they're struggling to make bigger stars, like you saw when Mayweather left. I know you've got your Tyson Furies, and you got Ryan Garcia now, who's someone that's really identified with sort of the YouTube audience. MMA has the same issue. The reason a Conor McGregor or George St. Pierre became so popular is because they had the charisma, they were exciting in the octagon, and they connected with an area of the world. With Conor McGregor, it's Ireland. With George St. Pierre, it was not only Canada, but French Canadians. That's something people really underestimate, and it's so hard to have that
national symbolism is there, isn't it? Yeah.
Amanda Nunes is headlining this card. She's going to go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, women's mixed martial artists of all time. And I'll tell you, more people are interested in the co-main event than her main event fight. And it's because of the fact that people only resonate with certain fighters. They've tried to push Amanda. She was on, I think, Kelly Ripa's show, I think, after she won the title and beat Ronda Rousey. Didn't do anything. It's just not. It's so hard to create stars, and I think again that comes back down to, where the sport is going. And you need, like, Conor McGregor was big, but think of who we've lost over the years: Ronda Rousey, George St. Pierre. There's been a number. Brock Lesnar was huge, bringing over those wrestling fans. So to me, it really depends on the fighters that you have to sort of bring it to the next level.
John Jones as well.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, and Jones with his issues, right? He hasn't been fighting that much.
6 Canadians on the card, as you mentioned. There's a main event and a co-main event. Give me the fight that you're most interested in tomorrow.
It's got to be Mike Malott and Adam Fuju. I know you guys had Mike on the show. I had got to play a little NHL 94 with Mike. I don't know if you guys saw that. That was a lot of fun.
We did.
Yeah, something a bit different. They're really pushing Mike. The fact that he is the fight behind the co-main event speaks volumes. He's had 2 UFC fights, 2 knockouts. I'm really interested in this because if Mike goes out there and knocks him out, there's potential here for him to be the next sort of big Canadian star. Not on the level of like a GSP, but still someone that the UFC is going to prioritize when it comes to making their Canadian cards and pushing him there. And all he needs to do is win. Mike owned the press conference yesterday. I was blown away. There's certain fighters that, they enjoy doing media. Mike thrives in it.
Yeah.
He was very well, I mean, you guys know this, you interviewed him as well, but it's just that, like, he is really made for this. And certain fighters, like, there's some amazing fighters out there, they hate doing interviews. But Mike is someone that I think has relished that. He's easy to market. The Nelk boys, they've created a partnership with him as well. So they're going in on him too. So
is he an entertaining fighter? Does he do things wild? Or?
He's getting knockouts. That's what the fans want.
First round too.
First round finishes. In fact, Mike hasn't been out of the first round in quite some time.
Wow.
So that is a recipe for something the UFC can work with, and that's, to me, a fight I'll be keeping an eye on.
What do you think we're looking at in the main event, Nunes and Aldana?
I like Nunes. The thing with Aldana that I think people have to remember is her strength of schedule has not been that strong. The girl that she just defeated, Macy Chasson, there was a fight at 145. It was not the same division. Yana Santos, not a highly ranked fighter here. I'm not going to count Aldana completely out because she trains at a gym with flyweight champion Alexa Grasso, who herself got a big upset earlier this year over Valentina Shevchenko. So not going to count her out, but Amanda Nunes is the greatest women's fighter of all time, in my opinion. She had the one blemish against Juliana Pena in a fight that I think we can look back on now and say that was an off night for her. I think Nunes goes out there and gets it done. And then we start talking about, when she's looking to hang it up because she's sort of running through all these contenders.
Let's touch all the bases then. In the co-main, Dariush, or where are you going?
I like Oliveira here. I think he's being overlooked. He had a very bad performance against Islam Makhachev in his last fight where he lost the title. There's a lot going into that, though. He had to fight in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, the fans were on Islam's side. We see Charles get hit a lot in his fights, but he's able to get it done. He couldn't get away with that in the last fight with Islam. With Dariush, while I do think he poses a lot of threats, and I do think this is the closest fight on the card, I just like the power that Oliveira possesses. I mean, this is a guy that, knocked out Michael Chandler, who's an extremely talented striker, and Oliveira's got the ground game to back it up. There's talk about him maybe missing weight today. He came in at 154. That, to me, is a very focused fighter, and I like his chances as the underdog this weekend.
He's a Bodog guy as well, so I'm obliged to tell you, Nunes at -325, Oliveira at +130, so a little bit of value there.
Absolutely, yeah. I expected this too. I figured that people would look at Oliveira and, after that last performance, say, okay, he's done. And Dariush has looked good, but I think Oliveira, if you look at his strength of schedule, he's fought some of the best fighters in the weight class, and he's finished them. That, to me, is a key point in this fight.
At Lynch on Sports, he's local, he's independent, he's an authority on UFC, and we're absolutely over the moon to have you here in the studio, finally get you on a secure some price. Thanks for this, James.
Thank you guys for having me on. Anytime you want me, I'll make the trek down here. It's always a pleasure.
Appreciate it.